The cathedral doors swung open to the triumphant swell of Pachelbel's cannon, and for a moment, Amara Cole felt like she was floating. 600 guests rose in unison, their faces blurred by tears of joy, her own and theirs. The December sun streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow fractals across her grandmother's pearl-encrusted gown. This was it. The fairy tale her father had promised her before cancer stole him away 3 years ago. Her bouquet of white peonies trembled slightly as she took her first step down the rose-petal aisle. At the altar, Damien Cross stood impossibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled. That $1 million smile that had graced the covers of Forbes and Architectural Digest Star. The man who had swept her off her feet 18 months ago with helicopter rides over Manhattan and whispered promises of forever. But something felt wrong. The smile on Damien's face seemed forced, his eyes distant. Her maid of honor, Chelsea, her college roommate, her closest friend since freshman year, was nowhere to be seen at the altar where she should have been waiting. A cold knot formed in Amara's stomach as she continued her measured walk, the wedding march suddenly feeling more like a funeral dirge. "I need to powder my nose," she had told her wedding coordinator 15 minutes ago, lifting the train of her dress to hurry back toward the bridal suite. What she found behind that door would shatter more than just her heart. It would ignite a fire that would consume everything Damien Cross had built. The memory of silk falling to the floor, of Damien's hands tangled in Chelsea's auburn hair, of the words she wasn't supposed to hear. Once we're married, her father's shipping routes will be ours. Just a few more hours, baby. Crashed over her like a tidal wave. Now, as she reached the halfway point of the aisle, Amara's step faltered. Every guest leaned forward, concerned murmurs rippling through the cathedral. But she wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about the choice that would define the rest of her life. Continue walking toward a man who saw her as nothing more than a business acquisition, or turn around and reclaim her power. The bouquet fell from her hands, white petals scattering like snow across the marble floor. What would she choose, the illusion of love, or the painful truth of betrayal? Amara Cole had never been the kind of woman to back down from a fight. At 28, she had inherited her father's steel spine along with his shipping empire, though grief had made her question her ability to lead. Marcus Cole had been a legend in maritime logistics, a self-made billionaire who'd built coal shipping from a single cargo vessel into a global powerhouse. His sudden death had left Amara feeling unmoored, desperately seeking an anchor in the storm of corporate politics and boardroom sharks circling her company. That anchor had seemed to appear in the form of Damien Cross. Damien, at 34, was Manhattan real estate royalty, or so the world believed. With his carved jawline, intense gray eyes, and an empire of gleaming skyscrapers bearing his name, he embodied everything the media loved about New York's elite. He collected art, dated supermodels, and spoke 4 languages fluently. When he'd approached her at a charity gala 2 years ago, claiming he'd admired her father's work and wanted to honor his memory, Amara had felt seen for the first time since Marcus's death. What she hadn't known was that Cross Development was hemorrhaging money. A series of failed international ventures and a devastating lawsuit had left Damien's company weeks away from bankruptcy. Her father's global shipping network represented the lifeline he desperately needed, but only if he could access it through marriage. Chelsea Morrison had been Amara's roommate at Columbia Business School, a vivacious redhead with dreams of fashion empire greatness. Over the years, she'd struggled to make her boutique consulting firm profitable, borrowing money from Amara more often than she repaid it. When Damien had approached her 6 months ago with a proposition, seduce his fiancé's best friend to ensure the wedding went smoothly in exchange for funding her struggling business, Chelsea's mounting debts had made the choice feel inevitable. Standing in that cathedral now, Amara felt the weight of everyone who had believed in her. Her father's business partners in the front row, colleagues who had watched her struggle to fill Marcus's shoes, friends who had celebrated when she'd seemingly found love again. They had no idea they were witnessing the death of one Amara Cole and the birth of another. The organ continued its majestic melody, but inside Amara's chest, a different music was playing, the fierce, uncompromising rhythm of a woman who had just discovered her true strength. Amara turned around. The collective gasp from 600 guests echoed through the cathedral like thunder. She lifted her chin, her grandmother's diamonds catching the afternoon light, and walked with purpose back down the aisle, not fleeing, but advancing toward her future with the dignity of a queen. "Amara!" Damien's voice cracked across the stunned silence. He stepped away from the altar, his carefully crafted composure finally showing cracks. "What are you doing?" She paused at the midpoint of the aisle and turned to face him, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's acoustics. I'm choosing truth over lies, Damien. Something you've never been capable of. The wedding coordinator, a sharp-suited woman named Patricia, hurried forward with obvious panic. Miss Cole, perhaps we should. No. Amara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. She addressed the crowd, her heart hammering but her voice steady. I want everyone here to know that this wedding is cancelled. Not postponed. Cancelled. Murmurs erupted throughout the cathedral. Phones appeared, cameras flashed. This would be front-page news by evening, but Amara found she no longer cared about protecting anyone's reputation except her own. Damien reached her side, his face a mask of concern that might have fooled her yesterday. Sweetheart, you're obviously upset. Let's talk privately. Like you were talking privately with Chelsea in the bridal suite 20 minutes ago. The words cut through the air like a blade. Yes, I saw you. Both of you. Discussing how marrying me was the key to acquiring my father's company. The cathedral erupted. Guests craned their necks, whispers became exclamations. Amara spotted Chelsea attempting to slip out through a side door, her face flushed with shame and panic. Damien's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Amara saw the man beneath the charming facade, cold, calculating, desperate. You're making a mistake, Amara. Think about what you're throwing away. I'm not throwing anything away, she replied, pulling the enormous engagement ring from her finger. The 5-carat diamond caught the light one final time before she pressed it into his palm. I'm taking it back. As she walked toward the cathedral doors, her grandmother's train sweeping regally behind her, Amara Cole felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Complete, terrifying, exhilarating freedom. The fairy tale was over. The real story was just beginning. 3 days later, Amara stood in her father's old office on the 42nd floor of the Cole building, Manhattan's skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd barely slept since the wedding, fueled by rage and espresso, diving deep into financial records that painted a damning picture of Damien's empire. Her assistant, Maria, knocked softly. The lawyers are here for your 10 o'clock. Amara nodded, smoothing her charcoal Armani suit. Gone were the flowing dresses and soft pastels Damien had always complimented. This version of Amara wore power like armor. The legal team spread documents across the mahogany conference table, contracts, partnership agreements, merger discussions that Damien had initiated months before proposing. Every signature told the story of a man who had seen her as nothing more than a business acquisition. The prenuptial agreement he insisted on, lead attorney Sandra Walsh explained, would have given him controlling interest in Cole shipping upon marriage. Very unusual structure for a prenup. It reads more like a hostile takeover disguised as a love contract. Amara's fingers traced the papers. Her father had taught her to read between the lines of every deal, to spot the traps hidden in flowery legal language. How had she missed this? How had grief and loneliness made her so blind? What are our options? She asked. Well, he can't touch Cole shipping now that the marriage is off. But Sandra hesitated. Our investigation shows Cross Development is in serious financial trouble. They've been using your relationship to secure loans, promising investors that the merger was imminent. Now that it's not happening, his company will collapse. Amara's voice held no sympathy. Over the following weeks, Amara became a student of destruction. She reached out to her father's network, shipping clients, logistics partners, international contacts who had respected Marcus Cole's integrity. When she explained what Damien had done, their loyalty shifted entirely to her. The results were swift and devastating. Harbor Industries canceled a $50 million port development contract with Cross Development, citing ethical concerns. Pacific Rim Logistics, who had been considering Damien for their New York expansion, abruptly chose a competitor. One by one, Damien's clients began finding reasons to look elsewhere. But it wasn't enough to simply watch from the sidelines. Amara began making strategic moves of her own. She hired away Damien's head of acquisitions with an offer he couldn't refuse. She bought out a key property lease his company needed for their flagship Manhattan project. Every move was legal, ethical, and absolutely ruthless. The media, initially fascinated by the wedding scandal, began following the business story with equal fervor. The Ice Queen's revenge, one tabloid called it. Helleth no fury like a billionaire scorned, proclaimed another. Amara Cole was becoming a force of nature, and for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. 6 weeks after the cancelled wedding, Amara found herself at the Mandarin Oriental bar, nursing a glass of wine and reviewing acquisition reports. The afternoon crowd was thin, mostly business travelers and tourists admiring the view of Central Park 40 floors below. Excuse me, but aren't you the woman who called off Manhattan's wedding of the century? She looked up to find a man in his early 30s, tall and lean with sandy brown hair and intelligent hazel eyes. He had an easy smile and wore a well-tailored but not ostentatious navy suit. Something about him seemed familiar. Depends on who's asking, Amara replied, her guard still firmly in place. Ethan Vance. He extended his hand. And before you ask, no, I'm not a reporter. I'm the CEO of Vance Ventures. I have to say, what you did took incredible courage. Now she remembered. Ethan Vance had been in the news 2 years ago when Cross Development had swooped in at the last minute to steal a major hotel development project from his company. The deal had been worth nearly $100 million, and Damien had won it through what many considered underhanded tactics. You're the Aurora Hotel project, she said, studying his face for signs of calculated interest. Among other losses to your ex-fiancé, yes. His smile held no bitterness, only frank acknowledgement. May I? He gestured to the empty chair across from her. Against her better judgment, Amara nodded. I read about what he did, Ethan continued, settling into his seat. The business merger disguised as romance. I have to admit, it was brilliant in its sociopathy. You almost sound like you admire him. I admire the strategy. I despise the man. Ethan signaled the bartender for a whiskey. I've been watching Cross Development's stock price. Very impressive work, by the way. Your systematic dismantling of his client base has been surgical. Amara felt her walls rise higher. If you're here to propose some kind of alliance. Actually, I'm here to propose a question. Ethan's eyes met hers directly. What happens after you destroy him? What happens to Amara Cole when the revenge is complete? The question hit her unexpectedly. She'd been so focused on bringing down Damien that she hadn't thought beyond his fall. I rebuild my father's company. I prove I'm worthy of his legacy. And is revenge the legacy Marcus Cole would have wanted for you? For the first time in weeks, Amara felt something crack in her armor of fury. She studied Ethan's face, searching for manipulation, for hidden agendas. Instead, she found something that looked like genuine concern. You didn't know my father, she said quietly. No, but I know what it's like to lose everything to a man like Damien Cross. And I know what it's like to realize that hate is a comfortable cage, but it's still a cage. As they talked through the afternoon, Amara found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone. Her fears about living up to her father's reputation, her loneliness in the 3 years since his death, her growing realization that she'd been as trapped in her grief as she'd been in her engagement to Damien. When Ethan finally stood to leave, he placed a business card on the table. If you ever want to discuss what building something looks like instead of just tearing it down, I'd be interested in that conversation. That night, alone in her penthouse apartment, Amara stared out at the city lights and realized that for the first time in months, she'd spent hours without thinking about revenge. Instead, she was thinking about possibility. 2 months after the wedding that never was, Amara received a call that changed everything. Miss Cole. Her head of security, James, sounded unusually tense. You need to see the morning news. She found the remote with trembling fingers, surfing until she found the financial news channel. There was Damien, impeccably dressed as always, standing behind a podium at what appeared to be a press conference. Deeply saddened by the vindictive campaign being waged against Cross Development by my former fiancé, he was saying, his voice pitched perfectly to convey wounded dignity. Amara Cole has used her grief over her father's death and her embarrassment over our relationships and to systematically destroy not just my company, but the livelihoods of the 3,000 people we employ. The camera cut to footage of protesters outside the Cross Development headquarters, employees demanding answers about potential layoffs, families worried about losing their homes. Children held signs reading, "My daddy needs his job and don't let them fire my mom." Amara's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on bringing down Damien that she hadn't fully considered the collateral damage. Damien continued, his performance flawless. Miss Cole has weaponized her father's business relationships to punish me for a personal matter. I take full responsibility for the pain I caused her, but I cannot stand by and watch innocent families suffer for my mistakes. The press conference was a masterpiece of manipulation. Damien positioned himself as the repentant lover, taking responsibility for breaking Amara's heart while painting her as a vindictive billionaire destroying working-class lives for personal satisfaction. By evening, the narrative had completely flipped. Social media exploded with criticism. #Amara Cole Heartless began trending. Op-eds appeared questioning whether personal vendettas should be allowed to destroy companies. Her own employees at Cole Shipping began looking at her differently, wondering if their ruthless new leader might someday turn her wrath on them. The breaking point came 3 days later when Maria knocked on her office door, tears in her eyes. "Miss Cole, there's someone here to see you." Chelsea Morrison stood in the doorway, no longer the polished socialite but a broken woman in a wrinkled dress and smudged makeup. "Amara, please. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to say to you. He's destroying me." Chelsea's voice cracked. The consulting contract he promised. It was fake. He's been feeding information to the tabloids, telling them I seduced him, that I was obsessed with him and manipulated the whole situation. My business is ruined. No one will hire me. I can't even get a job at Starbucks because my face has been on every gossip blog in the city. For a moment, Amara felt a flicker of the old friendship, the late-night study sessions and shared dreams. But then she remembered Silk falling to the floor and cruel laughter about her father's legacy. "You made your choice, Chelsea. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Chelsea wiped her nose with a tissue. "But Amara, you have to know, he planned this. All of it. Even the press conference. He told me that if the wedding fell through, he had a backup plan to make you look like the villain. He said you'd become so obsessed with revenge that you'd destroy yourself." The words hit like ice water. Amara realized with growing horror that she'd fallen into exactly the trap Damien had set. Her campaign of destruction hadn't just brought down his company, it had transformed her into the very thing she'd accused him of being. As Chelsea left, Amara caught her reflection in the office window. The woman staring back was a stranger, cold, isolated, consumed by anger. She'd won the battle against Damien, but in the process, she'd lost herself. For the first time since the wedding, Amara Cole began to cry. At 2 a.m., Amara found herself standing outside a 24-hour diner in Queens, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Through the window, she could see Ethan Vance sitting in a corner booth, exactly where he'd said he'd be when she'd called him in desperation an hour ago. He looked up as she slid into the seat across from him, his expression concerned rather than judgmental. "Rough night. Rough life." She accepted the coffee he'd ordered for her, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "You were right. About the cage." Ethan waited, understanding that she needed to find her own words. "I've become everything I hated about him," Amara continued. "I've hurt innocent people. I've used my power as a weapon. My father would be ashamed of me. Or he'd understand that you were in pain and made choices from that pain." Ethan's voice was gentle. "The question is, what do you want to do now?" Amara stared into her coffee, seeing not her reflection but the faces of the cross-development employees who might lose their jobs because of her campaign. "I want to fix it. I want to find a way to undo the damage without letting Damien win." "What if winning and losing aren't the right metrics?" Ethan leaned forward. "What if the real victory is becoming the person your father raised you to be?" Over the next hour, they outlined a plan. It would require Amara to do something that terrified her more than any boardroom negotiation. She would have to be publicly vulnerable, admit her mistakes, and trust that her father's reputation for integrity might be enough to carry her through. The next morning, Amara called her own press conference. Standing behind the podium at Cole Shipping headquarters, she looked directly into the cameras and spoke from her heart instead of her anger. "My name is Amara Cole, and I owe the people of this city an apology. Over the past few months, I've allowed personal pain to cloud my judgment and drive me to actions that hurt innocent families. The employees of Cross Development don't deserve to suffer because of a conflict between their CEO and me." She outlined a plan. Cole Shipping would partner with several major firms to absorb Cross Development's contracts, guaranteeing employment for every displaced worker. It would cost her company millions, but it was the right thing to do. "My father, Marcus Cole, taught me that true power isn't about destroying your enemies, it's about building something better. I lost sight of that lesson, but I'm committed to finding my way back to it." As she fielded questions from reporters, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. Not the cold satisfaction of revenge, but the warm recognition of choosing integrity over vengeance. When the press conference ended, she found Ethan waiting by her car. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "But also free." He smiled, the same easy expression that had first caught her attention at the Mandarin Oriental. "Want to grab dinner and talk about what building something looks like?" For the first time since her father's death, Amara Cole smiled with genuine happiness. "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, Amara stood in the rooftop garden of the new Colvance Innovation Center, watching the sun set over the Manhattan skyline. The building represented everything she and Ethan had worked toward together: a hub for sustainable business practices, ethical development, and companies committed to positive social impact. The partnership had evolved naturally from their professional collaboration. Where Amara brought vision and resources, Ethan contributed operational expertise and an uncanny ability to identify promising startups. Together, they'd created something neither could have built alone. More importantly, they'd created something together as partners in every sense of the word. "The Times review is incredible," Ethan said, joining her on the terrace and handing her a glass of champagne. "They are calling it a new model for conscious capitalism." Amara accepted the glass, their fingers brushing in the familiar way that still sent warmth through her chest. "My father would have loved this place. He would have been proud of you." Ethan's voice carried the certainty of someone who knew her well enough to see past her remaining doubts. The past 6 months had transformed both of them. Their professional partnership had deepened into something more gradual and authentic than Amara had ever experienced. There were no helicopter rides or extravagant gestures, just shared coffee at dawn, late-night strategy sessions that turned into conversations about dreams and fears, and the steady building of trust between two people who understood both ambition and integrity. Ethan had seen her at her worst, consumed by revenge and self-doubt, and had chosen to stay anyway, not as her savior but as her equal. In return, Amara had learned to be vulnerable without being weak, to lead without dominating, and to love without losing herself. "There's something I need to tell you," Ethan said, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. Amara turned to face him fully, recognizing the tone of someone about to take a significant risk. "I've been in love with you since that night in the diner when you admitted you'd lost yourself and wanted to find your way back. Not because you were broken and needed fixing, but because you had the courage to change direction when you realized you'd taken the wrong path." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, just truth offered without guarantee of return. Amara felt her heart open in a way it never had before, not the desperate gratitude she'd mistaken for love with Damien, but something deeper and more sustainable. "I love you too," she said simply. "Not because you saved me from my revenge, but because you helped me save myself." As they kissed against the backdrop of the city lights, Amara realized that this was what her father had really wanted for her. Not just success or security, but the kind of partnership that made both people stronger. The fairy tale had ended at a cathedral altar 6 months ago. This was something better, a love story built on mutual respect, shared values, and the daily choice to be worthy of each other's trust. 1 year later, Amara Colvance stood at the podium of the Cole Foundation's annual gala, looking out at an audience that included business leaders, philanthropists, and, most importantly, the families of former Cross Development employees who had found new careers through the Foundation's job placement programs. "Tonight, we celebrate not just what we've built together, but what we've learned about the true measure of success," she said, her voice carrying the confidence of a woman who had found her authentic power. "My father once told me that legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you inspire others to build." In the audience, she spotted familiar faces: Maria, now the Foundation's Director of Operations; Sandra Walsh, who had become the family's trusted legal advisor; even Chelsea, who had slowly rebuilt her life through the Foundation's entrepreneurship program and now ran a successful nonprofit consulting firm. Damien Cross was nowhere to be seen, which was fitting. He had faded into irrelevance, not through Amara's revenge, but through his own inability to build anything lasting without deception. Cross Development had declared bankruptcy 8 months ago, but every one of its former employees had found better opportunities elsewhere. As the evening wound down, Amara and Ethan stepped onto the hotel's balcony, the same view of Central Park where they'd first really talked at the Mandarin Oriental. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Amara considered the question seriously. The woman she'd been a year ago might have said she regretted the pain, the public humiliation, the months of destructive anger. But that woman had also been trapped in grief and fear, settling for a love that wasn't love at all. "No regrets," she said finally. "Even the mistakes led me here." As they watched the city lights twinkle below, Amara reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as her father's grieving daughter, lost and vulnerable. She had become a woman consumed by revenge, powerful but hollow. Now, she was simply herself, a leader, a partner, a a person who had learned that true strength came not from destroying enemies, but from building something worthy of her father's legacy. The engagement ring on her finger, Ethan's grandmother's simple platinum band with a single, perfectly cut diamond, caught the moonlight. It was nothing like the ostentatious rock Damien had given her, and that was exactly why it was perfect. Like their love, it was understated, authentic, and built to last. "What would you have done differently?" she asked Ethan, echoing the question that had haunted her for months. "Nothing," he said without hesitation. "Every choice led us here. Even the painful ones were necessary." As they headed back inside, hand in hand, Amara Colvance carried with her the knowledge that some love stories begin with betrayal and end with wisdom. She had learned that the greatest revenge is not destruction, but creation, building a life so fulfilling that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. The fairy tale had promised her a prince who would complete her story. Instead, she had found something better, a partner who inspired her to write a better story entirely. What would you have done in their place? Tell us your favorite love story in the comments. Hit the like button if you believe in love that grows stronger through adversity.